Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. 4 Chinese Coast Guard vessels, which appeared armed with deck-mounted machine guns, according to the Japanese Coast Guard, entered Tokyo's territorial waters around the Japan-controlled Senkaku Islands. Beijing also claims the islands. It was the 3rd protest Japan lodged with China in less than 2 weeks. This time, the incursion coincided with a visit by Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to South Korean President Yoon for the last time before Kishida steps down in early October. At this moment of increasing geopolitical tensions, what does the rapprochement of Japan and South Korea mean to China and to North Korea? And what does it mean for peace in the region? Joining us today are Takuya Matsuda, National Taiwan University Department of Political Science Taiwan Fellow, Japan Aoyama, Gakuin University Adjunct Lecturer, and Chen-Dong Tso, National Taiwan University Political Science Professor. A very warm welcome to you both on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Professor Matsuda, let me start with you first. Why has China made a 3rd incursion within the space of 2 weeks?
Right. I think this is a manifestation of how the trilateral, defense relationship between the United States and Japan and South Korea could actually, complicate China's strategic calculation. So this is, a typical probing, behavior from China's side, that they are showing their displeasure of this trilateral defense framework going forward, and they're possibly trying to drive a wedge between Japan and South Korea as the 2 nations try to strengthen their defense relationship. So before we get into, how it complicates, the calculus for China, let's also talk about the Senkakus themselves. Right. They're obviously also claimed by Beijing. Also, they are claimed by Taipei too, but Taipei does not aggressively assert that claim. Right. I think for Senkakus, it's where Japan, it's one of the most contested spaces between Japan and China. So China is trying to complicate and also undermine Japan's resolve, for example, over the Senkaku. So I think this is very typical behavior, but this is a typical probing behavior against Japan.
Okay. Professor Tso, during Kishida's visit to South Korea, North Korea also released over 900 propaganda balloons. They landed mainly in Seoul. Can you tell us what you believe the message was from Pyongyang?
First of all, that behavior shows Pyongyang's displeasure about South Koreans moving closer to Japan. That's for sure. And secondly, it also wants to show that it has the resolve and the ability to play an important role and to play an aggressive role in disturbing that bilateral cooperation.
And what sort of challenge or threat does Japan and South Korea being more friendly, what does that pose to North Korea?
First of all, because Pyongyang wants to advance its relationship to Japan. So if South Korea moves closer to Japan, if Japan wants to move closer to South Korea as well, then Pyongyang's intention and plan to get closer to Japan might be disturbed or be sidelined or even be impacted negatively. Secondly, because the very foundation of South Korea and Japan cooperation is U.S. cooperation with the 2 countries. In fact, that's a military alliance. So that is a very threat to North Korea if North Korea wants to keep South Korea away from the United States.
Right, okay. And so, Professor Matsuda, turning back to China, let's talk about that complicating the calculus for China.
Right. I think, for example, what this trilateral does is that, it's actually, by enhancing strategic cohesion among the 3 countries, what it does is that, for example, if China wants to start a war over Taiwan, they could possibly, escalate the war horizontally. When I say horizontally, I mean geographically to the Korean Peninsula, for example. That was a, concern that the United States had during the 50s, in fact. So, which means that by having this, trilateral defense relationship and enhancing strategic cohesion among the 3 countries, it actually blocks China's pathway towards, horizontal escalation, which means that, so in another way, we can call this a regional approach to contingency planning, that this trilateral defense framework is trying to do. So it actually does complicate China's ability to escalate the way they want. So
does it strengthen the first island chain?
In general, yes.
Yeah.
Because, for example, if China tries to open a second front in the Korean Peninsula, for example, if the war turns into a protracted war, then by having these three countries cooperating, having a platform to talk to each other, share intelligence, and having that strategic cohesion makes it hard for China to initiate a military conflict. Actually, in general, in short, it raises China's cost to initiate conflict, which actually, in overall, bolster deterrence in the region.
Absolutely right. So essentially, it's that word interoperability,
right.
Strengthening that between the three nations. Professor Tso, so why was it important? This was a trip that Kishida wanted to make before he stepped down. Why was it so important for him to visit Yoon?
First of all, this is a cornerstone of Kishida's foreign policy. He wants to mend the damage that between the two sides, the damage to the bilateral relationship caused by previous administration. So I think that's a mark of his foreign policy. Firstly, facing the increasing threat from Pyongyang and even Beijing, Japan sees it as vitally important to have a strong partner in its neighborhood. So not only United States, but most of all, South Korea. So that's why I think Prime Minister Kishida wants to improve the country's relationship with South Korea, and it sees as critically important.
And did he want to, Professor Matsuda, try to lock in the progress that has been made so far so that it can continue?
Exactly. So, Japan and South Korea had a lot of ups and downs in its relationship. So a lot of observers were actually concerned that this momentum that's being gained through this trilateral defense framework actually might not endure leadership change in the respective countries. So from Japan's perspective, this demonstrates Japan's willingness that Japan was willing to make sure that this trilateral defense relationship will go forward, and it's committed despite the imminent leadership change in Japan.
Right. And in April, Deputy Secretary of State, the US, Kurt Campbell, actually said that both leaders deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts. Can you, outline for us, perhaps firstly, how bad were things before this rapprochement?
Right. I think one of the most notable examples here is probably 5 years ago in 2019, South Korea even threatened to withdraw from GSOMIA, which is a military intelligence sharing agreement between Japan and South Korea, which was a pillar of defense cooperation between the two countries. So, as you may know, Japan and South Korea has a lot of disputes, political disputes over interpretation of its history in the earlier half of the 20th century. And those disputes spiraled into a trade dispute as well in 2019. So it actually culminated into South Korea technically saying that they want to cut defense ties with Japan. And this happened in 2019. So you can see how in the past 5 years, this is a significant change in the past, that we're observing here in the past 5 years.
Right. And Professor Tso, what were those factors, if we can say, in the past few years that enabled this rapprochement to actually happen?
I believe, first of all, the geopolitical environment is critical. Yeah, not only the threat from Pyongyang and probably Chinese mainland, but also Russia's invasion into Ukraine actually made an alert for Japan, and also the activities by Russian Navy ships around Japan has been increasing. So that also caused Japan to on a high alert about a possible collaboration among Russian, mainland China, and also North Korea. Right. And that's why it sees as critically important to have a strong friend, a strong partner in its neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's why South Korea becomes so important. I think this is the first factor I want to highlight.
Was it perhaps even more than that? I mean, obviously the increasing threat, external threat, but was it also the recognition that their security was actually intertwined?
Yes. I think that is also be appreciated by the South Korean government, the Yoon government. Yeah, because South Korea also sees the increasing aggressiveness of Pyongyang and the uncertainty in Beijing, and that's why people feel that. People in South Korea feel that they need to strengthen the country's collaboration with the United States.
Okay.
And the United States has consistently recommended South Korea to strengthen its cooperation with Japan.
But for decades now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Professor
that's right. So just a decade ago, then Obama administration actually worked very hard to make the two form intelligence sharing agreement.
Right.
I think their cooperation now is more than that.
Right, right. The one that they threatened to pull out of in 2019, but didn't quite because the US urged them not to. Professor Matsuda, Yoon has said that his greatest accomplishment to date as the leader of South Korea was achieving this rapprochement with Japan. Can you tell us about what you believe are the personal contributions of each leader to this rapprochement?
Right. I think President Yoon's part, he was very clear when he was inaugurated as president that he wishes to strengthen ties with the United States and Japan, because his predecessor, President Moon, was more focused on rapprochement with Pyongyang. So it's a huge strategic shift that he's been clearly, explicitly signaling to the United States and Japan. And also on Japan's side, I guess it's really hard to attribute this momentum to personal leadership. However, it is also fair to say that this would not probably have happened under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, because he was considered as a conservative politician in South Korea, who he was not very well received in South Korea. So, and in fact, Kishida was seen more as a liberal, open prime minister as opposed to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So I think the fact that this happened under Kishida is a very natural. We can argue that this was possible under Prime Minister Kishida's reign.
Right, Professor Tso, I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Do you think that this wouldn't have been possible under Abe?
Right. I think during Abe's administration, South Korea's president is President Moon, and of course, based on the past experience.
Yeah.
And
but in terms of the comparison between Abe and Kishida, it was Kishida the man that allowed this to happen.
Yeah, Kishida himself is another factor, because Kishida has studied in the United States, and he sees he values his personal experience in the United States highly, and so that's why he can make that move very naturally. And also he has many friends in the United States, so it is also relatively easier for him to conduct that policy shift than Shinzo Abe.
Okay. Professor Matsuda, China has previously, past few years, talked about their concern over Japan's defense build-up, obviously while conveniently not mentioning their own, the largest military build-up of any country since 1945. What in particular is it that China is most concerned about in terms of Japan's defense?
Right. I think Japan's been doing a number of things. For example, Japan has been increasing its defense budget to GDP, 2% of GDP based on the NATO metric. Also, Japan's acquiring counter-strike capabilities and militarizing some of the southwestern islands, especially the Satsuma Islands, which are especially close to Taiwan. And Japan is also trying to build a joint command structure within the three services of self-defense force. And also, in particular, Japan is trying to integrate with the U.S. armed forces in Japan. And as you know, U.S. intervention into Taiwan is the center of gravity for Taiwan's defense. And all these measures that Japan are taking are actually going to help, actually enable U.S. interventions in Taiwan or other regional contingencies. So this actually does concern China. For a number of reasons, by complicating their strategic calculations.
Right, right. Tell us more about that. You talked about the militarization of the Southwest Islands. What was that physically enable Japan and the U.S. to do?
Right. So these islands are actually really close to Taiwan. For example, Yonaguni Islands is only 70 miles off coast from Taiwan. Miyako, which is the most eastern island of the Sachishimas, is only 350 kilometers away from Taipei. And actually, the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force has been installing bases on these islands in the past 10 years. And we have land-based anti-ship missiles, like what we call A2AD capabilities, which actually prevent the Chinese from actually entering the zone that the missile covers. So actually, this covers northern Taiwan. So it is still unclear to what extent Japan is able to fully use these capabilities, its full potential. Obviously, this is for self-defense. But still, this is something that the PLA has taken note that this could complicate their strategy. And this could potentially have a huge impact in changing military balance in the region.
Right, yes, that certainly sounds significant. Now, one of the key objectives of Kishida's visit to South Korea was the signing of a memorandum on cooperation of protecting Japanese and Korean nationals in third countries in the event of an emergency situation. Japan and South Korea will cooperate to evacuate their citizens. This is Japan's first agreement of this nature with another country. Professor Tso, why the urgency in signing this now?
Okay, I think it is very natural to imagine that the most possible scenario would happen in Taiwan, because of the increasing tension in the Taiwan Strait. But I think what also important is why the two countries can sign this cooperation agreement. First of all, let's look at other countries' experience. Just in this year, we see French troops help evacuate British nationals from Niger. And we also see the cooperation between New Zealand and Australia to evacuate nationals from a South Pacific island country. So in these two cases, we see that that kind of cooperation happened usually in two very closely closely connected nations, so like France and the United Kingdom, and also Australia and New Zealand. So I think right now Japan and South Korea have this agreement, which means that the two countries have enhanced their mutual trust so that they can work together on this. And secondly, at the moment, the two countries are also discussing about the easy entry for their nationals into the other country. So if they work together to evacuate their nationals in a third country, then that could also mean that there should be an easy entry for the nationals to the other country.
Right, okay. Professor Matsuda, the idea that Taiwan probably is the most urgent situation where they would need to do these evacuations?
Right, I think that's also one example for sure. But I think one thing that's, as Professor Tso said, this is about mutual trust between the two countries. So actually there's a precedent for this. So this was low-hanging fruit for the leaders of two countries. So last year, right after the Hamas attack on October 7th, the Korean military actually helped evacuate dozens of Japanese citizens from Israel. So this was high praise from both sides.
So it happened in an ad hoc way in Israel, but now this is the formalization of that agreement. Okay. Now, on the one-year anniversary of the Camp David summit on August 18th, the leaders of the United States, Japan and South Korea issued a joint statement reaffirming their commitment to peace in the Indo-Pacific region and declaring they are prepared to address, quote, the world's most significant challenges. These included commitments to enhance joint military exercises, increase intelligence sharing, and deepen economic ties. Professor Tso, after 1 year, what progress has been made?
I think before Camp David summit, actually the two sides have already lifted the restrictions each side imposed on the other side. For example, Japan's export control, export ban toward South Korea. And
what sort of materials were banned?
The key component for South Koreans' electronics production. More specifically, semiconductor production, and also on the side on the part of South Korea, in March 2023, it has already lifted the requirement for Japanese companies to pay back to reimburse Korean nationals who suffered during the Japanese colonization period. So that was before the Camp David. After the Camp David, we see that they can conduct military exercise together, and also we see that both sides can have a very mature intelligence sharing agreement. But more than that, we also see that diplomatically they work in the same direction. For example, in dealing with Pyongyang, Pyongyang wants to alienate Japan away from South Korea. And Pyongyang wants to have a summit with Prime Minister Kishida. But I think Japan consider Koreans' feeling and Koreans' consideration into picture. So that's why the Prime Minister Kishida has not done that yet. I think that's also one indicator. We can see that the two countries have moved forward in their cooperation.
Okay, and Professor Matsuda, for you, what was essentially, the fundamental change that Camp David brought about, or at least formalized, and has there been progress on that?
Right. So I think we're still at a tactical level when it comes to coordination among the three countries. But I think one of the main takeaways from Camp David summit is the commitment to consult with each other. So this is not necessarily an alliance, but it's a platform for three countries to talk to each other when there's, let's say, a regional contingency that could be, regional war, or which we don't want it to happen.
How significant is that consultation?
In terms of, when you want to fight together, or, divided labor when it comes to regional war. As I mentioned earlier, if the war horizontally expands to the Korean Peninsula and Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. needs to, coordinate and fight together. For example, like during World War II, the reason the Allies were successful was that the British and the Americans had a very, robust coordinating mechanism. So coordination matters a lot. We don't want war in the region, but in case something happens, the three nations need to talk to each other and work together. And we're at a point where we're trying to consolidate that framework for the three countries to work together.
Right, right. And so on that note, Professor Tso, we did mention that, the US for decades has wanted Japan and South Korea to come together. Tell us in a little bit more detail, what does that trilateral security partnership, what does it mean for United States? What does it enable America to do?
Traditionally, United States maintain a hub and spoke structure in Asia. That means the United States work with individual countries. But gradually, that becomes a burden for the United States when it comes to coordination. And sometimes the alliance partners fight against each other while they both are U.S. allies. And that reduces U.S. effort to forge a strong security alliance. And so that's why U.S. sees it as critically important to have Korean and to have South Korea and Japan to work together, to share intelligence together with each other, and also to conduct military exercise together. And furthermore, they want to have a united stance against vis-a-vis their neighbors. For example, they want their China policy to be coordinated with each other. And that could make their policy even more effective.
Right. And I think that is the crucial point, isn't it? Professor Matsuda, how would you characterize Kishida's relationship with Joe Biden, and how did that relationship, or even friendship, how did that enable the changes that we have seen under his leadership?
I think in general, Prime Minister Kishida and President Biden has a very good working relationship. They've been meeting occasionally, frequently on different occasions. And I think in general, if I was to characterize the changes in the security relationship in the past couple of years, I would argue that it has shifted from untangling the legal and political restraints on Japan's use force to having a more integrated, structure between the Japanese self-defense force and U.S. armed forces. So for example, the 2022 defense strategy Japan unveiled talks a lot about integration with the United States, and which actually synchronizes with the 2022 U.S. national defense strategy. So you can see how the two nations, not only at the leadership level, but also in a lower level, the two nations trying to work together so that if something happens in this region, the two countries can fight together if necessary.
Okay, and final words to you, Professor Tso. So Kishida will be stepping down, as we said, in October. What sort of state does he leave Japan's security in?
Of course, he revised the guidelines and other legal documents governing Japan's self-defense force. I think that's very important. Secondly, he boosted Japan's defense expenditure significantly. He said that the target of 2% for Japanese defense expenditure. That's second thing. Thirdly, he strengthened the military deployment in Japan. And as we can see that also the restructure of the U.S. military command in Japan. But I think most importantly, he formed a consensus among the LDP leadership that strengthened the Japan-U.S. alliance is critical for Japan's security and also security in the region.
Okay, thank you so much. We have to end it there. Professor Matsuda and Professor Tso for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.
We bring you stories from Taiwan.
Every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you.
News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's up, Taiwan? On Taiwan Plus.